Hey everybody, welcome back to episode 9 of Pizza Legends. In this video, we're going to continue with our Overworld event system, adding 2 new event types and 2 new ways to trigger cutscene events. We're going to add text boxes that appear on the screen when you talk to people, and then we're also going to wire up certain spaces on the map to start cutscenes of their own. We're going to be using that feature to wire up doorways to connect map to map, so you can walk from this map to this map to this map and really connect the entire world. Let's get started. Let's open up Overworld Map, and in here there's a method where we start the cutscene. Start cutscene. You know, this method sets our flag to true, and then it goes on to do a bunch of asynchronous things, and then finally at the end it sets it back to false, and that whole thing will take a bit of time. After we set it back to false, we want to reset NPCs to do their idle behavior. So here we'll iterate through all of our game objects. Again, just like our old friend object.values, this.gameObjects. For each object, we're going to run that method on it called doBehaviorEvent, and that method needs the map passed in, so we can just say this. Now, when we boot up the game, this first cutscene will happen, and then after that's done, the characters will kind of go back into their idle thing. There is a bit of a terrible bug that we left behind in the previous video regarding how the stand commands can interact with the global cutscene loop and NPCs kind of resuming their idle behavior. So we're going to fix that right now. Basically, what we want to do is make sure that if someone is in the middle of a stand command, that they can't have another one fire on them. Otherwise, that'll cause some of those set timeouts to multiply, and that's bad. So all we need to do to resolve this is pop open to person.js. We're going to add a new little piece of state, just like we have one for walking, which is that moving progress remaining. We're also going to add one for standing. So is standing, it's going to be false at first. This means like we're working on a stand queued command. Down here, when we start the behavior, let's see, when we start to stand, we can go ahead and set that flag to true. And then when that timeout's done, we can set it to false. Now in GameObject.js, when we fire off that method to do a command, we want to just check and make sure that we're not standing. So if this is standing is true, then nothing will happen here. That's pretty important because we don't want to end up creating one of these asynchronous actions. We want to just stop it right before any of that would happen. Okay, so now we're going to move on to adding the first of 2 event types that we're going to create in this video. The first type is probably my favorite. It's the text message. So that's like when you walk up to a person and you talk to them, there's a big blob of text that goes up on the screen. This is also kind of exciting because it's sort of our first dive into kind of component-based UI things in this game. Right now it's been all like overworld stuff, but now we're going to get into showing kind of text pop-ups and that sort of thing on screen. So the first thing I'm going to do is make a new JavaScript file called textmessage.js. And this is going to be a class with a constructor. This constructor is going to take in 2 things. It's going to be text that we want to show on the screen, and then an onComplete callback, which we'll talk more about this in a second. So let's just assign these. So this.text is going to be text, and this.onComplete be onComplete. And then we're going to create an element, and this is the element that we're going to append to the DOM when we're ready to show this kind of text message, and that's just going to start null. So throughout the rest of the project, the UI components are going to kind of follow this sort of pattern, where each one is going to have a method on it called createElement. And this is going to like create a div and populate it with text and presentational details from scratch. As usual, we're also going to have an init method, and the init method this time is going to take in a container. And then when this is called, this class is going to create its element and then take that container and append whatever was created to it. So append child. And the thing we want to append is this .element. And so up here, the element will be created, and then this .element will have a value to it. Okay, so here we go. This .element is going to be document.create a new element, and we're going to start with a type div, and then we're going to go ahead and add a class to this element. So classlist.add, and the class is always going to kind of match up with the name of the class. That's just sort of a convention that I like to follow. And then we can set some inner HTML. And to do this, I like to do parentheses and then the backticks so that we can kind of create a nice little area here. And so this template's actually going to be a paragraph tag that we're going to inject with some text, and then a button down here, which I pasted in here. I'm following the BEM style of class names here. So it's usually the name of the component and then underscore and then kind of what area of the component we're talking about. So in this case, this component will only have one button. So it's text message underscore button. It's got the word next in there. When the text message pops up on screen, we're going to be able to skip through it with the enter key, but also by clicking a button. And that's what this button here is for. Let's take the same kind of class name idea and apply it to our paragraph tag. So we'll say text message P, making sure those are closed up. That looks good. For now, we can just inject the text that's passed into the constructor here into the HTML. In the next video, we're going to rework this a little bit to have a little bit of a nicer presentation. We'll talk about that later. But for now, we can just say this.text, and we should be left with a nice little chunk of HTML that we're ready to append to the DOM. So now we can go ahead and start writing some styles for our new text message component. And so far, we haven't done a ton of CSS in this project, but we're about to. So I'm going to come in and start making like a little bit of a better file structure for us. So I'll create a new directory called styles. And then our only existing style file is this one, styles.css. I'm going to take this and drag it into our new styles file. Move. And then I'm going to create a new one that's going to match our JavaScript component name exactly. So it's going to be text message.css. And then in here, we'll put all of our text message styles. Before we do that, let's just do some maintenance here. So styles, this file is called styles.css. That doesn't make a ton of sense anymore, because of course it's styles. So I'm going to rename this to be global.css, and that's going to kind of cover like all of the global sort of variables we have and just some broad level strokes. Next, let's go to our HTML file and just make sure that the styles are imported correctly again, because we've renamed them and they're not. So I'm going to change this reference to styles global. See, VS Code even kind of knows what we're talking about. And I'll do another one for text message.css. Okay, so popping over to global CSS for a second, I'm going to include some CSS variables that we're going to be using throughout the rest of the project and all these little UI bits that we're creating. See that I've got some hex colors set up here for like border color, dialog background, menu background. You can totally change these to be whatever you want. I just wanted to paste them in here so you don't have to sit through me typing out hex codes. But basically, these are going to come up a few different times, and we're going to go ahead and use them in our text message style right now. So over to text message CSS. Now I'm going to start styling our text message component that we created. So this thing is going to sit at the bottom of the screen. And so I'm going to throw position absolute on it. And then it's also going to go the full width and kind of hug the sides. So we're going to go left 0, right 0, and then bottom 0 to make it hug the bottom there. I'm going to give it a height of like 36 pixels or something. Now throughout the rest of the project, we're going to be writing some CSS values that might seem a little bit small, like height 36 pixels here. That's not very tall. But remember, at the very beginning of the project, we included some CSS that scales up the game container. So even though we're only saying 36 pixels here, it's going to be quite a bit larger on screen as long as we're scaling it up. And that's really important for accessibility. You never want anything on screen to be too small where it's like really hard to touch or really hard to read, anything like that. Okay, so keeping it moving here. Font size, give us some padding too. We're probably gonna make this a little bit more perfect in future videos when we apply some real styling to it, but this is just gonna get us going for now. I'm gonna paste in some of those usages of CSS variables. So like the background color for the panel, the border top has a certain color to it, and then the color of the text. Now let's move on to that paragraph that sits inside our text message component. Remember, we have this paragraph here, text message underscore P is the class name. And so we'll do that, text message P. We're gonna reset the margin that usually comes with paragraphs. And then I'm gonna move this font size from the parent up to the paragraph here. And then let's do a similar thing with our button. Now for the button, I'm gonna go ahead and paste in just some sort of button reset styles. So like a smaller font size, some padding, getting rid of some of the weird stuff that happens on iOS, at least in legacy iOS it did. And then getting rid of some of the default browser background, that kind of thing. The important part here though is that we want the button to hug the bottom right side of our container. It's just gonna like kind of hang out over there. So we'll also make this position absolute and have it hug the right, maybe like 2 pixels and then be on bottom. I think for our purposes right now, this is going to be totally fine for this video. Again, if you want to tweak the presentation styles, this is your game. Go for it. Let's get this text message component on screen now. So we are already set up to create the element and sort of add it to the DOM with the container that we specify. But now we need to wire it up to be one of our overworld events. Let me clean out some of these files. So let's take a look at overworld event.js. Remember, we added our stand command and our walk command. I'll just collapse those to clean up the screen a little bit. Now we're going to add one called text message. And again, just like the other ones, it's going to take in a resolver. So here we'll say const message is going to be a new instance of text message. And that's going to take in two things. One, it's going to take in text. Remember, we set this up before in this file here. Text and onComplete is what we need. So the text is going to come from the Overworld Event config object that we're going to create. So we can say this.event.text. Just like the walking commands had like direction on it and the who on it, that kind of thing, the text message command is going to have the text that we want to show. And then here's our onComplete. This is what needs to be called when the text message is done being acknowledged by the player. So I'm the player, I see it, I can like click that button or hit the enter key and then proceed past the text message. When that happens, the onComplete callback will be called. And then from there, we can resolve our resolver there. So just like that. Now this part here might seem like an extra step, like why are we just passing this through? And it's going to be nice because in the future, we're actually going to reuse our text message class in other usages beyond just the overworld. So for example, same kind of text boxes are going to appear in the battle scenes. By this class just taking in some text and then a thing that should happen whenever we've seen the text, it kind of decouples it from the overworld and it's going to come in handy later. Okay, now we can say message.init. And we need to pass init a DOM container that we want to inject our message into. And so that's going to be document.querySelector. If you remember from before, if I pull up the browser again here, way back in the first video, we set up this container called game container. And this is kind of where everything in the game is going to live. And so we're just going to use that as our selector. So document.querySelector game container. So when this text message event method runs, it's going to create a new text message and then init it, passing in where it should inject the text. And then init is going to create the element that gets injected and then inject it. And then we should see it on screen. So let's modify our game opening cutscene with one of these text message events. So we'll go to overworld.js and then in the init methods, remember we have this array here of events that should fire. I'm going to comment out all of these for now. And just make a new one called type text message. Oops, text message. And the text should be, hello there. Now when I reload the page, we see that this message appears on screen. Now it's cool that it's working, but there's currently no way to actually get past it. Like the arrow keys are locked. It's a cutscene technically playing, right? So all the action has stopped. We have our button here, but the click handler for the button is not wired up yet. So let's go ahead and do that now. Okay, back in our text message code, right after we create the element, we can go ahead and start applying bindings to it. So we can say this.element.querySelector button, add event listener, click. And when we click this, we can go ahead and maybe, close the text message. Okay, so there's going to be a few different ways that we can close this, two specifically. And so to reduce code repeating, I'm going to just make a new method for done. So whenever we want to close the text message, we're going to call this done method. So here I can say this.done. In done, we're going to take our element and remove it, so it won't be on screen anymore. And then we're going to go ahead and call that onComplete callback, which will then resolve the event, and then action in the cutscene will continue forward. So to do that, all we got to do is say this.onComplete and call it. Now over here in the browser, when I click the button, everything disappears and then action resumes. Now just to demonstrate, let's make this opening cutscene a little bit more fun. So instead of the text message just popping up, I want the hero to walk 2 spaces down, and then I want this character to walk up and to the left and just sort of greet the hero, and then I want that text message to appear to kind of make it feel like they're talking to each other. So moving to VS Code, to the Overworld code, we said that we want the hero to walk down twice, and then I'll move this text message. Before that happens, we want NPC A to walk up and then left. And then we want the hero to kind of stand to look towards the hero. Right now he would just be left facing downwards. And so we want the hero to stand facing the NPC. So that's going to be the hero turning to face the right. And then we'll give that the time of like 200. Let's see what this looks like. Ta-da! So again, pretty cool. You can construct these little events however you want them to be. This is how we're going to tell stories. Now there's one thing we need to do before we move on from this text message bit, and that's to enable the part where we can close it with the enter key, the keyboard. Right now I have to click this button. It kind of takes me out of flow if I have to like grab the mouse to interact with the game. And so we really want everything we can do to be keyboard accessible. Now we've done a little bit of key binding already in the game. I think if we pull up direction input, we'll find some code. We added document event listener for key down, and that sort of thing definitely would work for what we're about to do next, but there's a little bit of baggage to it where out of the box, add event listener key down is going to fire the function, the callback function, but then if you leave the key held down, it's going to like continue to rapid fire call that. The behavior we are kind of going for in this game is more like a classic gamepad press, where you have a button, you press it in, and it's going to do the thing, but then it's not going to do it again until you release and then press it again. So for us to achieve that in JavaScript, we have to make a little bit of an abstraction around it. You can reach for like keyboard shortcut libraries in JavaScript that kind of help you do this, but ours is going to be so simple, we're just going to do it here. We're going to be using this a bunch throughout the project too, so it's nice that we just kind of tackle it now. I'm going to make a new JavaScript file called Keypress Listener, Keypress, capital P, .js, and it's going to be a class. The constructor of this class is going to take a key code that we want to listen to and then a callback, and that's what we want to happen when the key code is pressed once down. We're going to make a little flag called key safe, and that's going to start as true. When you press the button, the callback's going to fire, but then we're going to change this flag to false. And we're not going to allow that callback to happen anymore until that flag turns back to true. And the way you return it back to true is by lifting up on the key. So here comes the code for that. We're going to create two new functions, the key down function and the key up function. And so each one is going to be bound to the key code that we listen to. So starting with key down, it's a new function that takes in an event, the key code event. If the code matches the key code that we've passed in and the key safe flag is true, we're going to go ahead and set the flag to false and then call the callback. The only way for that key safe value to go back to true is through this key up function, which will bind to the key up listener. And that's going to be the same thing. It takes in a key up event. The event code must match our key down that we passed into the constructor. And if it does, then we'll set the flag back to true. All that's left now is to bind these up. So document add event listener, key down is going to be our this.keyDown function. And we'll do the same thing for key up. Okay, cleaning this up a little bit. So the reason that we saved the callback function to the class like this with this dot is so that we can unbind it later. So I'll create an unbind method. And it's going to do the same thing that we did here, but it's simply going to remove those event listeners. So for example, when we're done showing one of those text messages, we can fire off this unbind command on our key listener, and then it's going to stop listening for that command to close the message. Alrighty, let's get this added to our page. So index.html, just like before, we'll need a new Keypress Listener. And now in our text message, how about right under the button click, we can say this.enter listener, or how about this.action listener is going to be a new Keypress Listener. And again, that's going to take in first the key code. So we need enter. And then the thing that should happen, and then for us, it's going to be this.done. But let's just see this working first if we can. So I'll say console.log, enter. Okay, so to the browser, you can see my console down here. It's a little crunched. Give us a little bit more space. When I reload, I can hit enter, and I'm holding it down, yet you can see that the callback's not repeating. I have to keep pressing it, I have to release, and then press again before it's going to fire. So this seems to be working fine. We'll go back into the code, get rid of that, and then go ahead and call this.done. But we also want to make sure that we unbind our action listener. So we can say this.actionListener.unbind so that after this one, everything will stop listening. This isn't always going to be necessary. It's only necessary in this case because we're kind of getting rid of the component. In the future, we're going to be using this Keypress Listener for things like action handlers and menu keyboard presses that the binding will stick around even after it's been called once. Okay, so let's see if this works. Into the browser, message, enter key, and it's gone. Nice, so now I can resume the game. Seems to be working great. So this is working really great, but where these text messages really shine is when you get to like walk up to a person, hit the enter key to talk to them, and then have the text message appear. So let's kind of explore how we can get a cutscene to fire, not when we load the game like this, but only when we navigate to a person and talk to them. First, I'm going to navigate to the spot where our cutscene is firing, and so that's going to be in Overworld JS. When the game starts up, this .map.start cutscene thing, let's just go ahead and comment this out. So just like we created this .direction input here, we're going to make some similar things for the action input. So I'm going to make a new method on Overworld JS called this.bind action input. Let's come up here and define it. And here we're going to use our new Keypress Listener, again, listening for that enter key. And whenever it's called, we're going to go ahead and run something on our map. And we're going to ask the map, is there a person here to talk to? And this particular binding can just kind of always hang out because the overworld map will change in and out. We'll see that later on in this video, but the actual overworld won't. And so this binding can just kind of live here without us needing to unbind it ever. So on here, I'm going to say this.map.check for action cutscene. And if I could spell it, scene. What this is going to do is check for a cutscene at a certain position. This method is going to look through the map's game objects and determine if they have anything to say. We'll talk about that in a second. And if they do, it's going to go ahead and fire off one of these cutscene cues. Okay, to Overworld Map, we're going to make a new method. We can put it right under this one. Again, right above the wall ones. We're going to say check for action cutscene. And first we want to know where the hero is. So the hero is going to be this.gameObjects with ID hero. Technically this could be any of the player controlled game objects like we talked about before, but for now we're just going to assume hero. That's going to be fine. You remember how when we were talking about collisions, we set up a helper method for get next position to kind of help us figure out what is in front of somebody? We can reuse the same idea now to figure out if there's anything in front of the player. So the chords we want to check, we'll call it next chords, are going to be utils.getNextPosition, if it can find it. Oh, just next position. And then we're going to pass in the hero X, the hero Y, and the hero direction. From here, we can iterate through all of our game objects and figure out if any of them are at this position, and then furthermore, if that one at that position, if we find one, has something to say. So to look for that, we'll say a match is going to be in our object values, our game objects, we want to find an object that has position. Let's see if we say, kind of make up one of these positional strings, right? So for object X and Y, it must be equal to our next chords. Next chords comes back as a XY kind of object pair. And so we need to construct the string to look to be in the format that we expect it to be. So next chords.x, comma, next chords.y. Okay, and then got a little comma straggler there. From here, let's just console log after this runs to see if we have a match. So over to the browser, reloading, I can walk around, and if I just press the enter key, you'll see these console logs happening where match is undefined. But if I go up and stand right in front of a person, I should be able to hit enter, and then match will come back with a person object. So now that we have one of these people object matches, we can kind of look through them and figure out if they have anything to say to us right now. It doesn't have to be only text message events though. We're going to give them basically an event queue of their own that any cutscene event type can live in. So even if you talk to them and it causes something else to happen, that's totally fine. We're definitely not limited to just text messages here. So back to the code, let's go ahead and configure people to have event queues that can live in their content. So go to Overworld Map and scroll all the way down to where we're defining our people. Let's find that first NPC A. Right under her behavior loop, I'm going to make a new array called talking. In talking, we're going to have an object And the object is going to have events on it. And events is going to be an array that looks just like this. So we could bring over the one for text message. So if I find the type text message one and bring that over. Now we're using this kind of structure because in theory, in the future, this person may be able to say different things at different times. And so this time we only have one defined, but imagine like they need to say this thing in the game right now, but maybe later on in the game they say something else. So for example, maybe at the beginning of the game they say something, but then after you've beaten a certain boss, you come back to them and they're like, hey, congrats on beating that boss. We need them to be configured to handle different cases like that. We're going to fill in that system later on in a different video. Just know that the structure here has a little bit more of a future to it. For now, I'll go ahead and clean this up and maybe give her some attitude. Like, instead of being so friendly, how about I'm busy, go away. I like snarky NPCs. I don't know why, I just do. So now we are configured to receive a talking list. We need to set up our game object constructor to be ready to accept it. So this .talking is going to be config.talking or an empty list. There's always going to be a list of some kind, even if it's empty. Now if we go back to our map code in the method that we're looking for a match, here we can say if match and match.talking.length, we're going to go ahead and start a cutscene using that list. So that's going to be this.start cutscene, match.talking. We'll just use the first one, .events. We're also going to check to make sure that we don't have a cutscene playing already. So if this.cutscene is playing, making sure that it's false. Let's just see what happens now when we fire it up. So when I walk around and I hit the enter key, not seeing anything because there's no match. But if I go up to a character and say enter, you can see that a cutscene starts. So she says, I'm busy, go away. Lovely. Now just to demonstrate the point, let's beef up that cutscene a little bit more. So Overworld Map, where she says, I'm busy, go away. Not only that, we're going to have the hero kind of walk away, like in shame. So we're going to take this type, move it to walk, direction. It's going to be up. Don't need a time anymore. But we want to make sure that we specify who is the hero. Now let's see what happens. I'm busy, go away. Now there's another little bit of niceness that we want to layer in here. Check it out. When I talk to this person when she's not facing me, like this, you see that she's still facing the right. Sometimes we prefer that the NPCs rotate to face the hero when the hero comes up to them. You don't always want that necessarily. There may be a cutscene that you're building where you want the characters to kind of keep their backs to the hero, maybe if they're being dramatic or if they do some kind of like spin reveal, that kind of thing. But for most like friendly NPCs in the world, it's nice to have a quick utility that they can just kind of automatically face the hero whenever they're talked to. So in order to achieve this, we're going to add like a little bit of extra detail to just this first message command. So I'll come back to the content here. In this NPC's talking events, this first text message, we're going to add face hero and then the ID of the person that should face the hero. And so in this case, it's going to be NPC A. Now, when we handle this event in Overworld Events, we can add a little check here. So we'll say if this.event.face hero is present, then we can say the object is going to be this.game objects, this.event.face hero, because that'll be the ID. So that'll be like our, NPC person. We want this person to change their direction to be the opposite of the hero. So if the hero is facing right, we want this person to face left. Hero is facing up, we want this person to face down. That way they'll always kind of line up and their eyes will meet. There may be a few other cases where we want this kind of logic on figuring out the opposite direction. And so we're going to go ahead and create another utility called opposite direction. And this is just going to be a function that we pass in a direction and then get the opposite one back. So we need the hero's direction here. Before we go any further, I think we need, this should be this.map.gameObjects and this.map.gameObjects. Let's go ahead and define this opposite direction helper. So we'll open utils.js and add another one kind of up here with maybe the directional ones. So this takes in a direction, give us some more space here. And then we basically just want to return the opposite direction. So again, here comes some not super glorious code, but it totally works. We're just going to check each direction. So if it's left, return right. If it's right, return left. If it's up, return down. And then we can just default to returning up. Now I think we're all good to try this out. Let's just check. Oh, here we go. Utils, make sure that's right. Utils.opposite direction. Let's fire this up in the browser. And when I talk to her, when she's not facing us, see that her direction then faces us. And the text message appears at the bottom. Console is hiding it there. Let's see that one more time. Bang. So now this is kind of nice because when you're configuring your cutscenes, come over here. If you want the NPC to face the hero, you just include this little bit, and you only need to do that the first time. So other text messages, they'll already be facing the correct way. But say you want the behavior where they kind of ignore you, or even if you wanted to extend this where they face a different direction, you could layer in some stand commands, or you could change the behavior of this face hero if you wanted. It's kind of cool to have that flexibility to construct the exact cutscene that you want. Now we can walk up to people to start cutscenes. Let's go ahead and start on the second way that you can trigger cutscenes in this game, and that's by stepping on certain places. Looking at our map up here, I see this closet area up here. What I want to do is set up a spot where when the hero steps into this closet here, I want one of these NPCs to kind of like come out and yell at him, like, hey, you can't be in there. What we're going to end up doing is specifying certain parts of the map that have a little bit of extra data on them, and we're going to call those cutscene spaces. So when the hero steps into a cutscene space, it can go ahead and trigger one of those same cues. First, let's get this guy set up and ready to yell at us. So we'll go into his config here, take away his walking behavior. So he's NPC B. We're just going to take out his behavior loop altogether and move him. So he should be a little bit closer. He's at 3.7 now. So we're going to put him at 6.5. And that puts him right here. Actually, let's move him to the other side though, so we can actually access the closet. So he's on 8.5. Now he's set up and ready to go. So let's go ahead and set up the data for associating cutscene cues with certain spaces. So I'm going to come into our overworld map config in our demo room. Let's just collapse some of this for now. But take a look at the talking here. We want this to look exactly like kind of the talking looks like, maybe just a tiny bit different. But we're going to collapse game objects, and then right under walls here, let's make a new bucket called cutscene spaces. This is actually going to be an object. We can use the location of the space as the unique key for it. And so we'll use our utility for that. I happen to know the position for that closet space is 7.4. But this is actually going to be not an object, it's going to be an array of possible events that could happen. And so same concept as the people talking, where maybe you step on this space and something happens now, but later in the game, the situation might be different. Something else should happen. This will give us the space to set up multiple possibilities for that. Let's go ahead and start creating some cutscene events here. So the hero, they're going to have to walk down out of that closet. So down and then to the left, like down to the left, and then I guess that'll happen at the end. First, we want the NPC to kind of walk over and yell at the hero, right? So we're going to have the NPC walk left and then face up. So that's NPC B, walk to the left, do this, but we're going to change it to stand, up, and then time is going to be maybe like 800. That seems a little long. Actually, how about like 500? Next, we want to show one of those text messages. So we'll say type text message, and the text is going to be, you can't be in there, you can't be in there. And then now we'll have our NPC kind of reverse his steps. So he'll walk to the right. So let's see, so stands up and then he walks to the right. Okay, I think this is ready. We'll have to see when we get it fired up. The next thing we need to do though is actually fire these events when the hero lands at this coordinate position. Popping over to Overworld JS, earlier in the video we set it up a listener of sorts for the action input. Let's do the same thing for the hero's position. So bind hero position check. So we'll create this new method, and in it we want to start listening for the hero's position to change. Now remember, in the previous video we set up little custom events to fire, like person walking complete. This is the exact piece that we can use to check for change when a hero moves. So let's go ahead and grab this, come back here and say document.add event listener, person walking complete. And if e.detail.whoid is equal to hero, then we know that the hero's position has changed. And we can check the overworld map for anything interesting at that location. So we can say this.map.check for footstep cutscene. Same idea as this one, but this one's triggered on footstep. Before we go too far, let's just remove this and make sure that this is working. So I add a console log there. Now when I walk around, you can see that these logs kind of fire when the hero is moved. So from here, we can take that out, bring our check back in, which we have not defined yet on our Overworld Map class. We'll do that now, Overworld Map. Right there with the other one, we have check for action cutscene. Now we're also gonna have check for footstep cutscene. I'm gonna move it below the action one because that's kind of how it is in the other file. Doesn't really matter, but you know, why not? And now we can kind of model the same idea that we did in the action cutscene space. So we'll get our hero, and then we'll look for a match. But this time the match is going to be this.cutscene spaces, and then we want to kind of splice together the key. So it'll be the hero's X, comma, hero Y, no space. And this will just be a nice kind of lookup on our cutscene spaces object, which I believe we still need to add to the class here. Yeah, so right here we'll say this.cutscene spaces is going to be equal to config.cutscene spaces, so they passed in. We'll default to an object there. Now as we walk around, let's just kind of scan and see if we have a match, basically just like what we did before. So I reload, I step, no match there, it's undefined, undefined, undefined. But when I go into this closet space, if I clear out the console here, it gives a little bit more room. It should be, there we go, a match came back this time with an array. So now we can just grab the events in this first array match and use that for our cutscene. So again, really similar to what we did up here. I'm gonna say if there's already a cutscene playing, we can only have one at a time. And match, we found a match, we can say this.start cutscene match 0.events. Now remember, in both of these cases, the 0 is going to go away. Right now we're just defaulting to the first one we find. In the future, we're gonna pull the list back that's relevant to our story progress right now. We're gonna get to that in a future video. Alrighty, so firing this up in the browser, I step, nothing, nothing, nothing. But when I step into this special space, there we go, we see a cutscene start. So he walks over, he says, hey, you can't be in there. And then the hero walks away in shame. And it should just keep working too. And so now you can see that we can fire off cutscenes pretty much at any space we want. It's just a matter of configuring them the right way. So the last thing we're gonna do in this video is create one more event type, and that event type is gonna be called change map. So this southern space here, the doorway space, when I walk the character into this space, I want to change away from this demo room and into a different map that we have defined in our global maps config object. So this event type is really going to open up new possibilities for us. Where now instead of just being stuck in this one map that you see on screen here, we're going to be able to walk from map to map to map. You can create as many maps as you want and then really kind of construct an entire world up that way. So first thing I'm going to do is create the cutscene space at the correct position there. So I'm going to go into our overworld map, into demo room, and right under this one that we've created, I'm going to make a new one. And this one's going to be at position 10. No, sorry, this one's going to be at position 510. And it's just going to have one entry again with events. It's going to look just like before. But this time we're going to make a new type of event. And it's going to be called change map. And this event needs to provide which map we want to change to. In the future, we're even going to provide more information, like where the hero should start in that incoming map and that kind of thing. But for now, we're just going to provide this. So our other map in our set is kitchen here. And so I'll say map is going to be kitchen. Now we need to do a little bit of maintenance here because we've sort of changed how maps need to be configured since we set this kitchen one up. So the first thing I'm going to do is take this game object definition there and change it to person. And then back here, we still have the old school way of our old coordinate system, but now we're using that with grid helper. And so for each one of these, I'm going to add with grid. Our hero needs to have that is player controlled flag on there, so we'll add that. Let's go ahead and actually just remove this one person to simplify the map. And then I want to start the hero at a slightly different position, 5, 5. And this person, when we make it to this new map, we want to have like a little bit of a greeting. And so I'm just going to paste in some talking instructions to him. So this is a different NPC. When I go up and talk to him, he's going to start a text message saying, "You made it." And we'll update that. Now in our Overworld Map class, we need to add a back reference back to the overworld itself. So this is going to start null. We need to call a method on the overworld, and I think that's going to be the first time we've needed to do this. And so we are going to kind of establish a relationship there. It's going to start empty, but then we're going to fill it in as the map is initialized. So when we start the map in Overworld, currently it's kind of tethered to this init of the entire game. But now we're at a point where we want to be able to initialize maps singly, kind of one at a time, and not always be tethered to the game starting. So I'm going to make a new method here called start map. And it's going to do all this code. And then it's going to set that overworld reference. So map.overworld is going to be equal to this, the overworld itself. And then we're going to move this to be this.startMap. We do want to take in which map we want to start though. So currently we're always doing this one. We're going to call it like that. So this is going to be map config, new overworld map, map config. And now we have a clear method that gets called here, yes, but also the overworld event will be able to call it, and that'll kind of switch out the map that we're on. So remember here in our cutscene space, we defined a new type called change map. But this method does not yet exist in our Overworld Event class. So let's add that now. Overworld Event class, let's just clean this up again. A new method that takes in that resolver. So it's simply going to call that method that we just made on the overworld. So to get that, we can do this.map.overworld.startMap. And now we want to pass in the map that we want to start. And so that's going to be window.overworldmaps. But the key should be whatever is on that event. And so again, overworld map, here's our event, change map. It's just called map, so kitchen. So this.event.map. Now when this whole thing runs, this should evaluate to be that kitchen configuration object. And then once that happens, we can resolve the overworld event. And then the flow should just continue like normal. So let's pop over to the browser and hopefully see this working. When I walk into this space, you can see that I'm transported to a new map. Everybody else is gone. It's a totally different world. Again, now we're reading from a different configuration object, and this person's here. And if I talk to him, he's got that message for me. You made it. So let's just see this one more time. When I walk south and then into this space, I get transported to a new map, and it's great. It's working. It is a little bit jarring, like the new map just kind of pops in. And then furthermore, when I go talk to this person, the presentation of the text box here is okay, but it's not quite as like interactive or conversational as maybe it could be. So in the next video, we're going to work on cleaning up the presentation of both of these event types. Thank you so much for watching this one to the end. As always, liking, hitting subscribe, those two things really help me out. There's still a lot more to go in this series, and I'm stoked for it. So thank you for being here. Reminder to join us in Discord if you have a game project you're working on, or you have any questions about this project or this series. Discord's a great place to be. We'd love to see you there. Thanks again. Catch you next time.